Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Yes, there was a quid pro quo. It has been clear for a while. It is clear as day in the call notes the White House itself released when the president of the United States tells the president of Ukraine, who's asking for more military aid, I would like you to do us a favor, though. On Friday, on this show, we laid out 9 pieces of evidence of the quid pro quo. It is becoming more and more preposterous for anyone to even try and say there wasn't one. But today, we got the most hilariously definitive answer to the question of whether or not there is a quid pro quo when we got to see U.S. Ambassador to the European Union Gordon Sondland's testimony transcript. It is over 370 pages in which Sondland skirts around whether or not there was a quid pro quo. But then after a few weeks of, reading press reports about what other witnesses were saying, Sondland said, yes, I do remember now. There was actually a quid pro quo that I personally delivered to the Ukrainian government. Yesterday, the day before his testimony was publicly released, Sondland sent a 4-page addendum to Congress saying other publicly released depositions, quote, have refreshed my recollection about certain conversations in early September 2019. He then explains, and I quote, I now do recall a conversation on September 1st, 2019 in Warsaw with a top advisor to the Ukrainian president. I said that resumption of U.S. aid would likely not occur until Ukraine provided the public anti-corruption statement we had been discussing for many weeks. Gordon Sondland delivered the quid pro quo. He testified to it in sworn testimony and put a stake in this heretofore unkillable question of whether there was a quid pro quo. The final one, I would hope. There was a quid pro quo. But that is not all we learned. We now know even more about this just bizarre world we live in which Rudy Giuliani, as the president's private attorney, no actual official U.S. title, is wielding the full power of the U.S. state. Sondland describes a May Oval Office meeting where President Trump expressed concern about Ukraine. Quote, he just kept saying, talk to Rudy, talk to Rudy. Sondland said Trump was not clear what he meant other than, quote, Ukraine is a problem. Sondland was asked, quote, did you ever discuss Rudy Giuliani with Secretary Pompeo? And responded, Pompeo rolled his eyes and said, yes, it's something we have to deal with. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo telling the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, yes, I know Rudy Giuliani has no real business doing this, but he's running a shadow foreign policy, and it's just something we have to deal with. Here's how Sondland describes how people perceive Giuliani in the State Department. Quote, people usually smiled when they heard Rudy's name because he was always swirling around somewhere. Swirling around somewhere. The story of Rudy Giuliani's far-reaching tentacles was a recurring theme in the other transcript that was released today when former special envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker, a guy who has served in the State Department under the last 4 presidents, recounted trying to explain to President Trump that the new Ukrainian president was committed to fighting actual corruption, the real kind. But according to Volker, quote, he just did not believe it. He was skeptical, and he also said, that's not what I hear. I hear, he's got terrible people around him. And he referenced that he hears from Mr. Giuliani as part of that. Now, 3 weeks before Trump's infamous call with the Ukrainian president, Volker had his own meeting with the Ukrainian president where he described something he called the Giuliani factor. Quote, I explained that I thought there is a negative narrative about Ukraine that is counteracting all the good things he is doing, and that this is being amplified by Rudy Giuliani. Rudy Giuliani was running a shadow foreign policy that completely circumvented normal channels, and the people that usually operate within the normal channels just had to kind of follow along. Here's how Trump appointee Gordon Sondland, a man who, let's remember, paid $1 million to be part of Trump's administration by donating to the inauguration, described the downward spiral of the Trump-Giuliani-Ukraine policy. Quote, it started as talk to Rudy. Then others talked to Rudy. Corruption was mentioned. Then let's get the Ukrainians to give a statement about corruption. And then no, corruption is not enough. We need to talk about the 2016 election and the Burisma investigations. That's, of course, Hunter Biden's firm. It kept getting more insidious as the timeline went on. It's just become more and more clear every day how rotten and corrupt this whole thing is. This is not just an addendum. It's not just an ask or demand. It's not just a bit of impeachable extortion. This is the entirety of U.S. policy with regard to Ukraine and the entire geostrategic lay of the land with this occupied country. And it revolves around the president's personal lawyer and his shadow foreign policy and a whole conspiracy to squeeze this nation, Ukraine, that the president has come to hate because Rudy Giuliani, along with Putin and others, told him to. Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.